do you still go here?
She's such a geek.
She's so freaking weird.
She's such a loser.
Dude, she's so ugly.
This is the reason she doesn't have any friends.
Did you hear what she did?
I swear I can't even look at her.
Why can't she be normal?
It's just different.
Again, Kwe, Nin Telewisi Wikamalam Papukwis. My name is Heart of the Hawk, and I would like to thank Dr. Gon. He really set a stage for me in talking about zero suicide in Indian country and why it's so important to actually have a framework on which we can build safer suicide care. The little video that was 30 seconds long was presented to me as a gift by the Sehotso Medical Center and the Zero Suicide manager there some years ago. And that little video is shown as a PSA in the TV stations in New Mexico and Arizona and in the 4 nations of the Diné Nation. And people have seen it and they've said it, that they have seen it. It's very impactful. And what it says, and if you were here for the last webinar, you heard about how important culture is when you are working with individuals and especially children, trying to reconnect them back to the root system, which is very nourishing and enriching and protective. It's one of our most important protective factors, is that connection to our root system. I want to briefly talk to you about what I do. I'm the tribal lead for the Zero Suicide Institute, and I've been in the field of behavioral health for over 52 years. I've been doing this work for a very long time, and I worked in systems as a clinician, as program manager, as city official with systems who didn't understand at all about what suicide prevention was and how to create safer suicide care in their health and behavioral health care systems. And then in my late career, I ran across a job description for the tribal lead for the Zero Suicide Institute and didn't really know anything about zero suicide or what it meant to even share my own lived experience. I've never talked about my lived experience as a multiple attempt survivor. Never. I talked about my recovery from an addictions challenge and my continued recovery from a mental health challenge, but never about my survival as an attempt survivor, a multiple attempt survivor. The ironic part about that is that it's a whole lot more common in our communities across Turtle Island than we really pay attention to, especially those of us who are first and second generation away from the residential or boarding school experiences and that deep intergenerational and historical trauma that exists in our community. Zero suicide in Indian country and the adaptation, if you will, like Dr. Gon said, I think it really is a whole lot more than that. For Indian country, the adaptation of the zero suicide framework happened as a result of the contract that we had to do technical assistance with the nations that were receiving awards from Indian Health Service to implement zero suicide in their nations. And I got a chance to work all over Turtle Island with unbelievably talented and passionate organizations, health and behavioral health organizations, both tribally run and IHS-led organizations all over Turtle Island, and the toolkit, which is called Best and Promising Practices for the Implementation of zero suicide in Indian country is a collection not only of ways to indigenize each one of the elements of zero suicide, but it's also a collection of the stories of hope, the stories of healing that people shared with me all over Turtle Island. So I want to talk to you a little bit, and Dr. Coffey at the end of the last webinar shared about zero suicide. Zero suicide is a framework that was developed almost 20 years ago. Henry Ford system has been implementing what is now called zero suicide. It used to be called perfect depression care. They've been doing that for 20 years now. It's a relatively new concept. The concept of suicidology as a field of behavioral health is relatively new, but they've been doing it for about 20 years. And they started seeing tremendous efficacy with the systems and with the evidence-based things that they were implementing into the way they provide care. And they saw their suicide rates for the people they served go way down. And so we know that these tools and these ideologies around what good, safe care is when people come in, asking the questions, doing good screens, following those screens with assessments, making sure that people are engaged in their care, that there are safety plans done, that there is means safety. You heard Dr. Gahn talk about means safety restriction and how do you keep folks from actually moving toward that attempt by intervening and actually talking it out and separating the individual from that means. So, and then making certain that good care transitions are made and that care that's delivered to the person is responsive to the suicidality, not depression and anxiety, but actually targeting directly that suicidality, that suicidal intensity. And then making certain that we collect the data to know what it is that we're doing that's working and what we might need to change. Next slide, please. Okay, so I talked about this, but zero suicide, it really is defined as a system-wide approach. It's a culture change in your agency. Your agency decides that the loss of one person in your care is one too many. So you make a commitment to provide safer suicide care. It's not an initiative, it's not a model, it's not a project. It really is a culture change. It's a way to look at the care you're delivering right now and to see where the holes and the gaps are that people can fall through, and then make that commitment to change. And every single person in your agency, in your system, makes that commitment too, and everybody's a part of that. Next slide, please. So there's 7 elements. And when I first joined the Zero Suicide Institute, they were shown in a linear fashion. And we know as Indigenous people that the circle has a lot of power. There's a lot of power in that circle. And there's no beginning and there's no end. There's no big person and little person. One person is not more important in that circle than the other. And so as I looked at the indigenization of the zero suicide framework, I put it into the medicine wheel, and you'll see that in the next slide. But I want to introduce these 7 elements. Now, some people think that they're doing zero suicide if they train people in some of those evidence-based practices that Dr. Gahn was talking about. And that's a piece of it, but it's not the entire thing. You have to start somewhere. So we usually start with the lead element. There has to be a commitment in the system, in the nation, in the behavioral health organization, in the community to be able to make a culture change. So that lead element, getting people together who are passionate, who are powerful, and who are people with lived experience is a really important place to start. And then you want to make sure that every single person in the system is comfortable and confident in their ability to work with people with suicidal intensity. Why? Because I can tell you after 52 years in the field that people are not comfortable talking about suicide. It's a very difficult thing to talk about. So making certain everybody is comfortable and confident, using evidence-based screens and tools to be able to identify people, and then engaging them with safety plans, and then providing good care that's evidence-based, and then making sure transitions are made safely, and that there's no time between when someone is referred for care and when they actually get it, and then collecting all the data. So you can, next slide, please. So again, zero suicide is all of these things. It's been shown to significantly reduce the loss of people in care. It uses evidence-based screening and tools. It wraps people at risk in good care that's safe. It's person and family directed. You know, the safety plan is not a clinician-driven tool. It's a person-driven tool. It addresses lethal means safety, and it transitions people at risk of suicide from one level of care to the next in a safe manner. You can go ahead. All of this, and Dr. Gahn set the stage for me perfectly, all of this has been shown to be highly effective, except none of these tools, none of these assessments, none of these treatments were validated on us. And many of our languages, including my own, have no word for suicide. We just don't have a word for suicide. And the word suicide, or even talking about someone who ended their own life in many of our nations, is taboo. And so I learned about, at White Mountain Apache, I learned about the term ghost sickness and learned about what that meant and why it's important not to talk about someone who ended their life, because that energy is felt to be brought to the nation. And I can't dispute that, first of all, because I would never dispute it. Second of all, how do you invalidate a cluster when that term for ghost sickness probably is addressing just that concept? Next slide, please. So one of the things that, and I'm presently in Oklahoma with 39 nations, 39 separate and beautiful nations here deep in Indian country right now. And I heard the term Native American culture. And I'm like, what the heck is that? Because the Chickasaw have theirs, and the Choctaw have theirs, and the Caddo have theirs, and the Cherokee have theirs, and every single one of them have different and beautiful cultures, and all of them have their own creation stories, their languages, their healing ways, their medicines, their dances, their colors, their regalia, and it's such a beautiful mix. There's no such thing as native culture. And we need to understand that we all have our own ways of articulation of what's health and wellness for our people. Next slide, please. And so but we do have some universal truths. We all believe in a power greater than ourselves, no matter what that power is called. We all honor Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandmother Moon, Grandfather Sun, and all of the elements of nature. We believe that everything has a spirit, and we all honor our ancestors who came before us and who prayed for us now. And we have traditional medicines and healing ways that are not hundreds of years old. They are thousands of years old. If anyone watches Curse of Oak Island, you know they're digging for treasure on this Oak Island, which is part of Mi'kma'ki, or what is now called Nova Scotia, my ancestral land. And several times I've heard them talk about the Mi'kmaq being able to carbon date our existence on this land back 30,000 years. So our medicines are ancient. So next slide, please. And many of us believe that this conversation that we're having today is going to impact 7 generations into the future. So somebody is going to tell somebody who is going to tell somebody and who is going to change practices. And all of this resonates out 7 generations into the future. And most of us believe that. Next slide, please. One of the things that especially today, and I know folks are aware of Auntie Deb Holland's report that came out, and that's the first part of it, around the residential schools or the boarding schools and the graves of our babies who never made it home. We need to acknowledge that trauma is real, that intergenerational trauma is in the blood. It's blood memory of our people. And we need to understand that trauma-informed ways to treat Indigenous people. And there's some good research out there. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, and of course, Dee Bigfoot, two Indigenous women who I've always considered mentors of mine. And there's a lot of work done that says that if we ignore that trauma, we're not going to do any work at all. It's not going to be effective. It's going to be useless. Next slide, please. But I'm one of those elders who say our culture is our medicine. I know our culture is our medicine. I know that the interventions you're going to, and I'm very familiar with these interventions because I've seen Noveline and the wonderful work that they do there at White Mountain Apache. Unbelievable work uniting the youth and the elders. We know that that's medicine. We know that these medicines are not always found in books. And today, in today's vernacular, we say our culture is not only our medicine, it's a protective factor, and it's a very powerful protective factor. And you're going to hear that throughout the day. Next slide, please. So best and promising practices for the implementation of zero suicide in Indian country. It's a companion toolkit to what I call the parent toolkit, the zero suicide toolkit. And it has not only forms that you can use and suggestions for care, for safer suicide care for Indigenous populations. And I have to tell you that at the age of 75, I'm in this field because of our children. I'm in this field because of the high rates of loss we're experiencing in our children. And I really want to even make a small difference in the way we look at youth, the youth we're losing, and how we can reconnect them and wrap our arms around them and help them to connect to the root system that is so healing. But you'll see things like that in there. You'll see videos of how people were able to get universal screening into every single clinic in a hospital, an IHS-led hospital. And no matter what door you come in, no matter if it's podiatry or dental, you're going to get a screen. And then that goes back to an integrated clinician to further assess that level and do a good risk assessment, because everybody doesn't need to be in the hospital. So the toolkit, and if you Google toolkit for Indian country, it immediately comes up. And it serves as a way to look at the way healthcare is provided in our communities, and very culturally based, and actually use this framework in order to provide safer suicide care. It's all in the toolkit. Next slide, please. This, I told you, I put the elements into the medicine wheel, and we're all familiar with the physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental areas of the sacred medicine wheel. Not all of us use the medicine wheel, and I just need to say that the physical part is not gray. It's not really gray, but the white wouldn't have shown up. But I was able to think about how would each of these elements, where would each of these elements fit and really be resonant for those who are providing care in Indian country. And of course, in the center is not the healthcare system. It's not the behavioral healthcare system. It's the people, families, and communities that we serve, the tribe, the nation, and they are at the center. And surrounding that is the lead element that we talked about, the people of passion, the people of power who can make changes in the health system, and of course, people with lived experience, all informing this. And we have a real challenge in Indian country with actually some of us being open about our lived experience because of the shame, because of the stigma. But I'm very happy to say that's changing. It's not changing as fast as I'd like it to change, but it is changing. Next slide, please. So we have some suggestions that are part of the Zero Suicide for Indian Country adaptation, and these can be used everywhere. It can be used in an IHS-led system. It can be used in a tribally owned system. But you want to make certain when you create this leadership team to be able to change the way services are delivered in your system, that that the community is the first person who is on that team. Your tribal government, the most successful implementation of zero suicide I've seen across Indian country have started with a tribal resolution, a resolution by the chief, governor, president, chairperson, whatever you call your leader, or tribal council, but also with the input of the elders and the youth, and especially traditional medicine. And it's so critical to have that. And one of the things that we've found out working across Indian country, that for indigenous people, it's often a combination of the Western medicine and the traditional. So if you're a nation that's more traditional in its approach and you ignore the traditional aspect of healing, you're not going to be able to get the Western medicine in. You're just not. And that a lot of the systems we worked with got rid of the name zero suicide, and they call it something that's life promoting rather than suicide prevention, understanding that for a lot of our nations, the word suicide is taboo. Next slide, please. One of the outcome stories comes from one of the very early adopters right here in the state of Oklahoma, and that's the Chickasaw Nation. They were able to take zero suicide as a framework, and this was before this toolkit came out, with no extra money and a dedication by Governor Anoa Tubby and his cabinet to say, the loss of one citizen in the Chickasaw Nation is one too many. And as a result, we are going to implement this framework called Zero Suicide. And they have gone forward since 2017. They're one of the earliest adopters in Indian country. And you can read their outcome story and what a difference it's made to have the framework of Zero Suicide as part of the way they do business, as a culture change in the Chickasaw Nation. Big, huge hospital serving a number of different nations around the area in Oklahoma. Next slide, please. So I really want to be able to take some questions if there are any, but you can find best and promising practices for the implementation of zero suicide on the website, zerosuicide.edc.org, or you can Google it, like I said, and you find Toolkit for Indian Country, and in that toolkit, you will find Don Warren speaks about zero suicide as a framework and how effective it is for Indian country, because it's a framework that includes not just the healthcare system, but the community as well. And all of those tools are there and available for you. Everything that's in there you can take and you can rebrand. And one of the things I really hope that you will do when you visit the toolkit is look at the Seotso Medical Center video. I was so honored and privileged to actually meet the traditional healers that are on staff there. There's a clinic called Traditional Medicine. It's under medicine. They have understood that you need to honor the medicine of the people, because I've been in Seotso Medical Center, walked in there and didn't hear English spoken at all. And the folks who are being treated at this medical center honor their tradition and uphold their tradition and their language and their ways. And so the staff at the medical center knew they wouldn't be able to get any of this into and down to the community without actually honoring the healing ways of the people. And one of those traditional healers you saw in that little video, he actually is the lead traditional healer. That's John Sosi. And I was just so honored, and I learned so much from them about the uniting of Western ways with traditional ways. And again, all of those Western ways were not validated on us. So I found, working across Indian country as I did with all types of different cultures, that that mix of the Western and traditional is often the most effective in Indian country. I think that might be my last slide. You can get in touch with me at sali@edc.org. And I would like to say Welaliok, or thank you all for being here today, and for we hope that some of this resonated with you and will prompt you to do a little bit further investigation of it.
Thank you, Sade, for really that heartfelt presentation. I feel you shared with us the essence of love and respect that is just so essential to this work. We do have a few minutes for questions and answers, and I want to point everyone in attendance to the chat function, which has the link which will take you to the portal where you can submit questions. While we wait for questions to come in, I'd like to begin with a question of my own that I hope to ask each of the presenters. And a primary question that's really guiding this entire workshop series is, what can change the trajectory of Indigenous suicide? Now, we know there are many barriers, but if we instead adopt a strength-based perspective, what change do you feel might move uptake of zero suicide in Indian country? What can we be working for, to advocate for, that would further these aims?
Well, one of the things that I think is really important is finding ways to have the conversation, really talking to communities about and framing it in a way so that the conversation is not offensive. The conversation doesn't close doors, but rather open doors. And as I said, one of the things I noticed working in Indian country was that a lot of the nations who had zero suicide awards or grants, they changed the name of it. So it was talking about life promotion instead of suicide prevention. It's all about the way you present things to the people. And Esther Tenario was one of the people with whom I was able to work, not directly, but certainly her work is in our toolkit. And I was very aware of what she had done in Pueblo San Felipe, and actually working with evidence-based interventions to indigenize them. And I heard Dr. Gahn say it, that we really can indigenize these interventions. So really intentionally working to make certain that what we're presenting is not the Western worldview, but really from an indigenous lens, and working directly on the ground with the elders and the youth and listening when people say, this is what's healing, this is what health and wellness looks like to me, and this is how I believe we can achieve, because our interventions, our health and wellness, all of those things were not studied. They're not in evidence-based trials. There's no peer-reviewed journal on a like you heard Dr. Warren say it. There's nothing that's researchable about a Sundance, nor should there be. But our healing ways are thousands of years old, listening to the communities when they say, this is what we need. We need to come back to our language. We need more language nests. We need to do more uniting the elders with the young people, so that cultural sharing, that reconnection to that root system happens.
Thank you. We just had a question come in that really seems to be exploring what you mentioned about this idea of indigenizing intervention. And I'll just read the question. Can you please elaborate on connecting youth with elders? This sounds very powerful to me.
Oh, Novaline is going to talk about that, and she's going to talk about it in beautiful, beautiful ways. But, I remember when we were doing the planning for this conference, people were talking about, and I know that the rates are very different for the loss of our elders. People who are my age are seen as wisdom keepers and culture keepers, and some of us are medicine keepers, and I can't go to a gathering where I can even get my own food. I get the best seat, and I'm so taken care of, and our elders are honored and held up and prized in our nations. It's our children who are at risk. So why not use those ways, that uniting of those of us who have some years with the children and helping them to reconnect. And I've seen beautiful, beautiful examples of that in Alaska in Fairbanks, when they go into the shelters and see these youth who are experiencing homelessness, and they bring them to a fish camp. And not only do they teach them to fish, they do it teaching them their language, and they do it teaching them not only to fish, but to use the entire fish, how to use the bones, how to do crafts. That's protective factors, and that's actually not only helping the youth to reconnect to that nourishing root system, it's also helping those of us who are up there in age to keep our vitality and to share and to feel useful. Yeah, I love that concept.
Thank you, Sade.